Hello everyone, welcome to this recording on the greenhouse gas methodology of the Innovation Fund. My name is Laura Pereira, and in this presentation I will briefly explain you how the GHG methodology applies to renewables as described in section 3 of the methodology document. I will also highlight aspects that applicants shall have in mind when completing their calculations. Section 3 of the methodology applies to what we call renewable energy projects, or you will also read and hear RES projects. And these comprise projects that plan to generate either dispatchable or non-dispatchable electricity, heating, or cooling using renewable energy sources like wind, ocean, solar, geothermal, and biomass-derived fuels. Applicants should also apply the renewable energy methodology if they plan to manufacture innovative components that will be used in renewable energy facilities, such as facilities that produce PV panels, blades for wind turbines, or even fuel cells for stationary applications. The RES category also includes projects that envisage to consume renewable electricity, heating, or cooling to reduce emissions and activities that are not covered under the energy-intensive industries category, or in other words, activities that are not covered under the Annex 1 of the ETS directive. Each renewable energy project has their own particularity in an infrastructure. This will be based on the resource available on their region, the geography of the site, and other factors as well, such as price. As such, to ensure we will receive comparable information for all applications, for renewable energy projects, we have a standardized boundary for the quantification, which means that the methodology presets the emission sources that must be included in the calculation. For the reference scenario, just one emission source has been considered mandatory for inclusion, which represents the energy generation in the absence of the project activity. Whereas for the project scenario, the number of sources to be included will depend on your sector. In the project scenario, applicants must include their expected on-site emissions, including stationary and mobile combustion of fossil fuels, and from the use of grid electricity. Since last year, applicants also must report on the use of acquired heating and the emissions of methane and N2O due to the combustion of biomass-derived fuels. Small-scale projects are exempted from having to report these sources. Emissions related to the production and supply of biomass-derived fuels shall also be included in your calculations, whereas whether your project envisages to generate energy using these fuels or whether you just plan to consume these fuels in your site operation, for instance, biodiesel in the vehicles that will be in your site. Then for all geothermal projects, all topics, including small scale, applicants will also have to estimate the leakage during these operations. The reference scenario represents what would occur in the absence of our project, or in other words, the amount of greenhouse gases that would be emitted by the conventional technology to produce the energy that will be displaced by the renewable project. So to ensure comparability of applications, what we understand as the conventional technology has been fixed for the different principal products expected to be produced in this category. For all projects aiming to produce non-dispatchable electricity, cooling, or to consume renewable energy in non-Annex 1 activities, the forecasted EU grid emissions of 0.176 tons of CO2 per megawatt hour shall be adopted. Then, if your principal product is dispatchable electricity, then you shall you are allowed to adopt the value of 0.505 ton CO2 per megawatt hour, which corresponds to the generation in a power plant using gas turbine. Important to note is that a dispatchable source of electricity refers to a power plant that can adjust their output supplied to the electrical grid on demand. So as a general guidance, non-dispatchable electricity normally comes from wind power and solar PV, and dispatchable will come from biomass, geothermal, and ocean products, but there are exceptions. So you shall inform in your application which type of electricity you intend to produce, and if you wish to claim the higher reference value, you must provide robust evidence that your project can be counted as dispatchable. And finally, if your principal product is heating, the ETS benchmark of 47.3 tons of CO2 per terajoules shall be adopted. I want to highlight here that the main chance of error in calculation of reference emissions is the adoption of an emission factor that differ from the one established in the methodology. Whichever is the actual reference scenario, the emission factors provided in the guidance shall be applied even if these leads to a lower reduction than you would have achieved under actual circumstances. The absolute GHG emissions avoidance for a renewable energy generation project without carbon capture component is calculated by the difference between the reference emissions and the project emissions, where reference emissions will be equal to the GHG emissions that would occur to produce the amount of energy displaced by the renewable, but using the conventional technology, and shall be calculated by multiplying the net amount of energy that the project will generate by the corresponding emission factor mentioned in the previous slide. If more than one product is being produced, then you shall calculate them separately and add them up. Then for project emissions, these again will depend on the sector, the resources used, and the topic or size of the application. Emission from on-site operations shall be quantified by applicants for all sectors. Only projects applying under small-scale topic are exempted from having to report these sources. The reporting of leakage emissions is mandatory for all geothermal projects regardless of the topic. As for the emissions from the production and supply of biomass-derived fuels are mandatory for all projects using these resources. Again, irrespective of the sector and of the topic. In these particular cases, the emission factors for production and supply of biomass-derived fuels shall be calculated and provided by the applicant using the guidance provided. No defaults will be made available. Then the calculation of the absolute emissions avoidance for projects that intend to manufacture components that will be used in renewable energy plants will rely on the same logic. Without the project, that energy would be supplied by the conventional technology. And with the project, we will have the renewable plant running and supplying that energy. So as you can see, the focus of the calculation is on the emissions that will occur in the operation of the off-taker, not on the emissions occurring at the applicant's facility. So the challenge in this case is to forecast the operational data in the final power plant, since that might not depend on the applicant's operation and knowledge. So for the calculations, the forecasted energy used in both scenarios should be reported on a unitary basis, or in other words, per unit of component being produced. This will allow you to multiply this specific energy consumption by the number of components produced each year, by the applicable use period of the component, which shall not exceed 5 years, and also by the cost of the manufactured component as a fraction of the total capital cost of the relevant facility. Very important is to make sure you document any quantitative and qualitative assumption that you use to forecast these consumption, production, and cost of component in your in the off-taker facility. Then our third project type, project aiming to consume renewables in activities not covered under the Annex 1 of the ETS directive. The absolute emissions avoidance will be equal to the emissions that would occur to produce that energy using the conventional technology. I mean, it will correspond to the reference emissions, and all project emissions can be disregarded. And this was a simplification introduced last year. I hope this presentation clarifies any questions that you had after reading the methodology. If not, we suggest you to consult the examples published and watch the tutorials that will be made available in the coming weeks. If after that you are still unsure about selected aspects of the methodology, please do submit your query to the dedicated help desk. Wish you a lovely day. Thanks for watching.